So good morning everyone and welcome to today's Wellness Lives webinar, Creating Cultural Supportive Environments for Wellbeing. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Katrina Walton and I'm founder and director of Wellness Designs, a boutique workplace wellness business that specialises in strategic consultancy, speaking and training services. And ultimately we're passionate about supporting organisations to foster a healthy, thriving and high-performing workplace. We're also very fortunate to be supported by a brains trust of an esteemed expert faculty, a group of expert advisors across a range of wellness disciplines, of which we're very honoured to be joined by one of those faculty members today, Dr Judd Allen, who's a globally renowned wellness culture expert who is joining us from beautiful Vermont in the United States today. So in this webinar, we're going to be exploring the question, is your wellness or is your culture supporting or undermining your wellness efforts in the workplace? And I'm sure many of you have walked into a workplace for the first time can immediately get a sense of the culture of that organisation. Or for any fans of the Australian iconic movie, The Castle, in other words, the vibe of the place. So as many of you tuning in today would be well aware, little of lasting value, including health improvements, can be made without a supportive culture. And I'm sure many of us have also witnessed a tick-the-box approach to workplace wellness, whether it be a Stress Buster seminar or resilience seminar, but without giving consideration to the broader cultural factors that impact, in that instance, on mental wellness in the workplace of our people. We're not giving consideration to things such as a long hours working culture or underlying human culture, as an example. So in this webinar, Judd will reveal the 6 dimensions for fostering a wellness culture in the workplace, together with outlining some field-tested culture change strategies, which will really serve to drive, embed and sustain your wellness efforts. But before we get going, just to go through a little bit of housekeeping items for the session. If you haven't already, just a chance to check your AV settings. And we will have an opportunity to field questions at the end of the session. And to do that, you just need to jot those into the Q&A box as we go. And if you do need to chat with the communicators or the organisers of today's session, you can just do that in the chat box as well. At the end of the webinar, we will send you out a very brief evaluation survey, just a couple of questions. We would love to hear your feedback as to how you have found today's sessions and also what other topics you would like us to see in the future webinar series. Dr Allen has also very generously extended a copy of slides from today's session together with a white paper as well, which will delve further into a lot of the themes from today. For those on Twitter as well, our Twitter handle for the series is #WellnessLives, if you would like to tweet some of Judd's wisdom as we go. So without further ado, it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr Judd Allen, who is President of the Human Resources Institute at LLC and an editor of the American Journal of Health Promotion. Since earning his PhD in community psychology from New York University in 1987, Dr Allen has assisted over 600 businesses, educational institutions, healthcare systems and government agencies to create healthier and more productive cultural environments. He's also the author of more than 50 books, journal articles, movies and software titles. And in his spare time, Judd is an avid runner, having completed 35 New York City marathons. We've been a great follower and advocate of Judd's work in the 22 years we've worked in the field, including sharing some of his insights as part of our nationally accredited Wellness Lives practitioner training, of which it's great to see another joining us again here today. And we were also very fortunate to attend his last workshop when he was in sunny Brisbane a number of years ago now. And I'm sure he's going to be sharing some further gems with us here today. So it's my great pleasure to now hand you over to Judd. Welcome, Judd.
Hey, great to be here, Katrina. Thank you. So I'm going to switch over to slides. Are you seeing slides at this point? Not yet, maybe. Let me see. Here we go. And here we go. And here we go. Is that good? Can you see the slides?
All set.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm so delighted to be with you folks today. I know it's morning there and evening here, but I am so thrilled about this subject. I think you will find it very helpful. What I'm going to offer up, as Katrina said, is a variety of ways to look at culture and then some of the strategies that we use to change culture. And as was mentioned, I've been at this for a while. My dad founded our company in the 1950s, and my first culture change and wellness project was in the 1970s when Coca-Cola bought Minute Maid orange juice in the United States, became the largest employer of migrant workers. And these workers were under tremendous health stress. They were working in the fields without any support and sprayed with pesticides, and their children were out of school and they were unable to access health care. And the whole thing was, as you might expect, miserable. And so the Coke hired us. They knew that that was going to be very bad PR for them, and to change the culture and make a healthy environment. And my first journal article in 1987, the first issue of the American Journal of Health Promotion, was about that project, and a book was written about the project called The Quiet Revolution. And so many of the things I'm going to share today are actually based on the experiences and stories of the clients that I've worked with over the past 30 years. And it's kind of fun for me in that I feel a little bit like a troubadour sharing news from elsewhere. You're going to have to translate this into what things would work for you. My experience is that each culture is unique, and all of our problems and challenges are unique, and all of our strengths are unique. And so we need to really use these ideas as a way of looking at our social environment. The term culture comes from the idea to cultivate, to create good earth, where in this case the idea of wellness will take root and grow. So we're looking at the web of social influences and how they affect health behavior and happiness and other important outcomes. And I've found it useful to organize my measures of culture and my strategies around these 6 different they're all overlapping, but let's just call them focus areas of culture or influences of culture. And so I'm going to go over each of them individually and just highlight some of the key ideas that would be embedded in each of the concepts. But you might find a whole seminar on each one of them. So this is 35-minute view of what culture is, but each of these could easily be 35 minutes or more of time to talk about them. Another important aspect of culture is that we're normally in our organizations dealing with subcultures, a variety of groups that have their own social web of influences within a broader culture. And in many organizations, there are shift workers that have a different experience, or there are professional groups that form their own subculture. In some organizations, there are groups of friends. There are even running teams in some companies, hopefully, and different groups that really have their own standards and values and support systems. And so sometimes when we're working on culture, we have to identify which subcultures get what. They're not all necessarily in need of or wanting the same content from us in working with culture, but we have to kind of see which groups we want to work with and identify those and address their needs. So I thought I would give you a brief overview of the various aspects of culture that are important to us in wellness that may not be deliverables that could be done through a more individualized approach to wellness programming. So most wellness programming in the States, and I believe in Australia as well, is targeted at individual change. So you question goes to the individual gets feedback, and then they may sign up for various classes or coaching or educational content, but it's not culture in the sense that it's highly focused on the individual. There is an overlap. Anytime you do something in a setting, you create attitudes towards it. So it's certainly true that the current mix of wellness programs are affecting culture, but the things I'm going to talk about today are more directed at the culture aspect and not particularly individual change. I do find the individual programming very important and useful, so I'm not someone who says, do this instead of that. I just feel like culture creates a foundation where a lot of the programs that we have put in the wellness effort will work better. So the first aspect is with culture, such as an environmental approach, you reach everyone. Just by being in the environment, you get the benefit. So many wellness programs only get a sign up for a small section of employees, and the advantage of a culture approach is through the environment, you can affect everyone. There's no one who misses the opportunity of being supported by the culture. Another area that our research has shown to be very important is that if the culture is not a healthy one, many people add to their risks by being in the culture. So you end up losing ground. So you might help someone, for example, stop smoking, and another person could be gaining weight because the culture is supporting gaining weight. And in our metrics in a wellness program, we could make a lot of effort and help some people, but as long as the culture is getting other people to adopt new unhealthy practices, we're not going to make monetary or even a feeling success out of that. And then this is an area that I think culture addresses that's very important and sometimes overlooked in wellness programs, is that healthy activities are a great way to create a sense of teamwork and collaboration and mutual support, and to raise morale. In the States, and I'm hoping this isn't true in Australia, many wellness programs actually reduce morale. They make people feel as if they're being singled out for their unhealthy practices, and they're feeling as if they're being treated like mice in a maze where they're only rewarded if they do what's asked of them. And believe it or not, in the States, many wellness programs are very poorly received because they have forgotten that wellness really could be a way to bring people together and increase teamwork and such. And then finally, and this is what I've done the most research on, is that in most of the companies, in all the companies I've ever studied, almost all employees are actively pursuing a healthy lifestyle goal on an annual basis. So almost everyone has in a year attempted some sort of personal change, whether it's exercising more or managing stress or getting along better with their families. Those are some of the most common, but there are many lifestyle goals. And unfortunately, our data and other studies have found that in the current environment, less than 20% of people achieve their healthy lifestyle goals. So this is, I think, our biggest challenge in wellness. We need not only to recommend good things, but have people succeed at achieving these changes for the long term. And what we're finding is where the culture is unsupportive, the success rate is quite low. As I said, 20% success is the average. We have jokes about it in the States. We call it New Year's resolutions. And we laugh about how few of them ever amount to much. But in truth, unhealthy practices are not something to laugh about. And telling people to make a change and having them fail is actually a stressor. We don't want them to fail. That would not improve their health. So these are some unique benefits of culture, of the culture approach we're going to talk about. The first dimension of culture I wanted to briefly touch on is this idea of leadership support. And I believe, and I wrote a book on this, that leaders can play an active role in supporting the wellness initiative, and that we need leadership at all levels. In fact, middle managers tend to be the gatekeepers on the ground. So we can't just assume that hitting the CEO or we call it the C-suite, the executive group, that's going to make the change. It really has to happen at various levels, and it might be union leadership, or it might be training up wellness committees, but it really needs to be a leadership initiative. And these bullets represent the skills that I've found most helpful for this leadership. The first, and I won't go through them all, but the first is to be able to explain the wellness program, why it's important, and how people can participate. The second is to serve as a role model, not to be a total model of health. I think none of us are, but to be able to talk about the good things that we're doing in our lives and share that with our employees or the people we're with. Leaders are uniquely positioned to determine the formal and informal policies, and we will come back to this, but leaders often set the rules, mostly the formal rules. Sometimes the informal rules they wish they could set, but they haven't been able to. But we need to look at that. And leaders often are involved in incorporating wellness into the strategic plan, or not. So many of us who've helped companies know that wellness should not be an extra, separate from the overall goals of the company. And so integrating wellness into the strategic plan is an important piece of changing the culture. And then leaders can track and celebrate what people are accomplishing. I think often employees don't get acknowledged for the changes that they make, and really could benefit from people stepping up and honoring the effort that people are making. And finally, and I brought this up earlier, leaders can see wellness as a way to create a better work environment, so that they are in a position to make sure that wellness, as I said, doesn't become a kind of negative finger-pointing operation, but is actually fun. Some of the leadership ideas. The second element of culture that I find very important are these informal and formal policies and programs. And I'm going to not go through them all, but I want you to get a sense that I'm not just talking about the formal rewards, like the compensation people get. Often we have informal recognition where people do good things and people are honored for that. And so we need to keep track of both. Relationship development is actually the most powerful cultural influence. We have a situation where if people form a friendship around a healthy activity, they're much more likely to stick with that healthy activity. So we need to make sure that when groups are forming and things are friendly and people are meeting each other, that includes healthy lifestyles, that those activities have a health component, not I know this might sound like a little off base for Australia, but maybe it's not all about drinking in the pub. It could have some positive component. I'm all for drinking in the pub and have done it in Australia. Let's say a balance of this. Let's see. Traditions and symbols, I think that's a uniquely cultural aspect. We really have so few traditions in many workplaces now. It used to be that you would celebrate years of service, or you would have holiday celebrations, you'd have birthdays to work with. And I suggest that we could fill that gap with wellness traditions, things that are healthy activities that we might do every year or periodically. I know that when I was working at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, we decided to line up with the New York City Marathon. You heard that this is my 36th New York Marathon this year. Well, that was conscious. We wanted to have an annual event that was a wellness event that kind of spoke to us. And that's just an example, I guess, of having a tradition that is a little bit of a wellness tradition. Pushback. So smoking policies are a good example of pushback, where people are asked not to smoke in workplace. But sometimes you'll get pushback for doing healthy things. So people who, for example, get away from their desk over the lunch might be seen as slackers, and that would be considered pushback. It's the flip side. And we need to reduce that sort of pushback and increase pushback that might get people going in the right direction. I once worked with a products company, I won't give the name because the story is kind of off, but they had a beautiful park course, a walking course around their corporate campus. And I was there for a week and I never saw anyone use it. And I asked employees, what was the reason? And they said, well, anyone out there would be sending the signal that they don't have enough work to do, that they're expendable, basically. And so I had to get the legal team, who were considered the busiest of busy, to go out and start using that park course, and soon everyone was doing it. So it just is a matter of dealing with that. So I'm going to go to the next culture area, and that is values. And what we want to do is raise the priority with which wellness is given to a top level priority, not the most important, but on the list of most important priorities in the organization. And I just want to say that I think with wellness, there are a lot of different benefits. There's living a longer life, there's being healthier for your retirement, there is having some exercise-related fun together. There are many benefits that we could highlight, but we have to get wellness on the list of important priorities in the organization. And you can ask employees, what would it take for us to consider the health of our people as a priority? What is it that would mean that to us? Norms are probably one of the more familiar ideas to culture people. And the interesting things about norms is they often go under the radar. We get so used to them, we just call it the way we do things around here. So people really forget what's going on with norms, but almost all the health behaviors that we're interested in have norms associated. So for example, in the States, and I bet it's true in Australia, it's a norm to sleep about 7 hours a night, even though medically speaking, we know that 8 hours would be a better number to target. And so the culture is creating a sleep-deprived society, and this is a norm. No one wakes up and says that's the norm. They just sleep 7 hours like everyone else. And sure enough, they have problems focusing and are not as healthy as they could be. So I just want to give you a sense of that. And then this other idea of peer support. What we want to do is increase the quantity and quality of support that people give each other. I mentioned that I wrote a book about Healthy Habits, Helpful Friends, which is about how people can help each other make these lifestyle changes. Not wellness coaching, it's not a professional idea, it's a kind of simple way for people to get comfortable helping each other make and set and follow through on goals and to help each other, basically. I've also written a few books on household and family support. These forms of support are critical because Most of us practice our health practices at home, and it really needs to be a home support concept or it won't stick. Most of these behaviors are household and family and friend behaviors. I will say that the research shows that when people help each other, the outcomes are much stronger and sustained. When we use more formal support systems, such as classrooms or Weight Watchers or these sorts of things, those things tend to fade away when the program stops. So we're really have to stick with the natural support system, the friends and family that people really have and are going to have forever. And that system has a lot of power, and we need to figure out how to reach that group. And climate and morale, another important aspect of wellness. I just wrote a book of 103 wellness leadership challenges, and all of them have to do with how leaders can build a stronger sense of community, a shared vision, and a positive outlook in their work groups. We've found where those three climate factors are available that much can be done individually and much more can be done as a group. That level of trust and openness and excitement really is what makes the world go round. And the nice thing about the climate area is it not only is a wellness issue in terms of life expectancy and lifestyle, but it's also going to improve other aspects of business functioning with people, as I said, solving problems and working as teams that they wouldn't be able to do if they were in a bad climate or unhealthy climate environment. So these are the ideas together that really shape culture. And I just want to say that there is a lot of overlap, and you may want to pick on one or another of these ideas in moving things forward. I hope some of you have read this book, The Blue Zones. There's a guy, Dan Breutner, he was a bicycle enthusiast, but he got this idea of going and finding out the places where people live the longest on the planet. He wrote this book, Blue Zones, with National Geographic. And I've been to these places now. It's a great experience. I was in Nicoya Peninsula this year in Costa Rica. And what's interesting for me is when an Australian or an American reads this Blue Zones book, they're likely to look at the special things that each of these groups do. You know, that, for example, in Loma Linda, California, which is the home of the Seventh-day Adventists, which is a religious group that's very health-oriented. They're vegetarian, they don't smoke, they don't drink alcohol, they exercise. You know, so we read that and we say, oh, that's what we need to do. But what's really unique about these blue zones, it's not one person doing this, everyone's doing this. So that's why it's a culture thing. It's not an individual thing. And so we have to get to that level. We have to create in our companies blue zones. Blue zone is just a demographic name for a place where people live forever. We need something comparable. We need to create an environment where people are encouraged and supported, and it's the way we do things to live a healthy, active lifestyle. So those were the main ideas I wanted to share with you today. Turning it over for questions or comments.
Fantastic, thanks Judd. So yes, I'll call out for questions now, and Judd, I might just take back the screen, if that's okay.
Okay. Should I release this somehow?
Yeah, fantastic. So any questions for Judd? And Judd, while we're waiting for any questions to come through, I just had one there. So how would you approach working with the C-suite, say, versus the middle managers when it comes to culture?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think we should know that many people in the C-suite are already very aware that culture is where it's at. They actually see it as their job at this point to create a culture. And so that's a very, that'll really resonate with them. When you say, what we're looking at now is creating an environment where people are doing healthy things. We're not going to only focus on individual change one at a time. And the reason they're aware of it is there's not very little that they can accomplish in the C-suite without having a supportive culture. So they are actually seeing it now as their job to create the right culture for their company. And so adding wellness to that story, especially if you're good at it, could be a great contribution to them because they're very interested at this point. If you poll executives about their interest in wellness, they will tell you that their #1 priority is creating a healthy culture. It's not one person at a time. It's the whole kit and caboodle. And so I think you're going to find that group very receptive to the culture idea. Although I'm willing to, if there's a follow-up question on that, if there's someone who's got a special problem, often so we have 1 or 2 naysayers in the C-suite who say this is not important to our company. They're not convinced about wellness. I do want to say one thing about that. Almost all managers and executives have had the same failure rate as all of us in lifestyle change. And so they're experiencing failure in their own personal changes 80% of the time. And they may be reluctant to recommend that their company take up something with such a high failure rate. So you have to kind of convince them that no, if we address this systematically and if we're creating a good environment, we can get that success rate up way above 50%. But their personal story may not have a lot of success. They may be overweight. They may have struggled with stress in their own lives. They may be worried that they'll be called upon to make the changes that we're recommending and not be confident they can do it. So we really have to convince them that with a supportive environment and with good education and all the other content that we're going to provide, they're going to have a very high success rate.
Some great points there, John. I think often too it's recognising, as you made comment, we're all on our wellness journey, aren't we? We're all working on aspects of our wellness, and we're not expecting our leaders to be the fitness fanatics or the gym junkies, but that positive role modelling in a variety of senses. We have a question come through from Amanda. Do you have any preferred ways for measuring cultural impact apart from dreaded engagement surveys?
Yeah, I normally use a 2-part approach. So the first part is a survey which asks employees to state their opinion, their level of agreement with all those 6 different cultural dimensions. So it might be, what's your level of agreement that wellness is a priority in your work group? Or what is your level of agreement that your immediate supervisor supports you in making these changes? And then there, obviously it's about 40 questions, 30 questions. But then I take the results of that survey and look at strengths and opportunities, and then I do focus interviews with employees to say, well, we found that managers are not supporting wellness or perceived not to be. What can we do about that? What would be the best strategy for addressing that? So I kind of use the interviews as a way to tailor the intervention a bit. So I find that people all have opinions, and when they're asked about these things, they feel much more likely to engage in the solution than if we just launch into our own prepackaged ideas. And it might improve the effort considerably, basically. So I use that multi-level. I also do some historical analysis in the company. So I look at what things have changed in the past and how did that work. So many companies have successfully addressed smoking, for example. So I try to find out where did that start, what were the temporary setbacks, and how did it resolve itself, and see if we can learn something about how change happens in that organization through the history of that's preceded it, basically. So those are, there's more to be said about that, but those are the three that I think would get you to a good start.
Fantastic. And that blended approach, as you say, Judd, the qualitative investigation is so important, isn't it, to provide that context and to garner ideas from the employees themselves.
It's helpful to have an outsider do the interviews because they won't be acculturated. They'll be able to see more clearly. You can, if you have a company with several sites, you could exchange the people for that purpose. It doesn't have to be literally an outsider. But I do think that it's hard to see your own culture. It's easier if you're from another perspective.
Fantastic. And Judd, we've had another question through from Gemma. How do you deal with toxic employees?
Toxic employees?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, first off, I think that the trick with wellness is not to antagonize that group. There will be a core group of people who are very enthusiastic about your wellness initiative. And then there'll be a group of quiet supporters. Then there'll be some neutral people who just have other priorities. There'll be some people who think you're up to no good, but are quiet in their opposition. And then there'll be an outer ring of maybe 2 or 3% who hate what you're up to and want to do you in. And my experience is that your best efforts are directed at that quiet supporter group in getting them to engage. But my other idea is to listen, of course, to those people who are toxic, because often they have an element of truth in what they're saying. So I wouldn't just discount it as not having any use. But I wouldn't try to win them over. You're not going to get a religious conversion out of this thing. You really have to just not antagonize that group.
And I know in your book, Judd, you talk about not getting preoccupied with those naysays and letting that health culture soften the group. And often you can see that shift over time, but at the same time it's recognising that often, particularly with wellness interventions per se, they are voluntary in nature. And even if they don't participate per se, they're still going to benefit from having access to a healthy work environment, a supportive culture. Their quality of working life is still going to be improved, whether they formally participate or not.
Yeah. I have been in a position as a consultant where I've had to recommend that people be terminated. I hate doing that. So I'm not, when someone says toxic employee, that does ring a bell to me. But I think that's really a last resort idea. And in fact, I would prefer to just create a better culture where that person either decides they're in the wrong place or shifts over, basically. That would be my primary idea.
So we've had another question come through from Helen. Where you have people who think their wellness message, that the wellness message is wrong, how do you get them to understand that it is based on science and evidence?
Well, you know, I think that historically, wellness has been sold as on a very narrow band of benefits. So in the States, and I hope it isn't true in Australia, but I have a feeling it is, it was sold as a economic measure to save the company money in some way. And so that, for a lot of people who don't have that as their primary responsibility, that's not so interesting to save the company some money on their personal practices. So I think broadening the benefits list, I find that it's useful in these focus interviews to ask people, what are the main reasons we should be doing wellness? And then have at least some of those reasons on the list when you're talking about what is this, why are we doing this wellness program? Well, you might leave in the money story, but you might have 4 or 5 other benefits that might speak to other people, maybe who are not as responsible for making the company money. So I find that is helpful. As I said, I think so much of wellness historically has focused on what we'll call health risks, or looking at what's wrong with people. And I don't blame people for being a little resistant and defensive when the program has been organized around what's wrong with you. So we have to shift more to a positive, strengths-based orientation. Look at what people are doing well and celebrating that and saying, what would you like to change? I started this talk by saying that about 80% of employees are actively pursuing healthy lifestyle goals each year. Well, if you keep haranguing them with information that assumes that they're lazy and not doing anything, they're going to get turned off by that message. You know, a lot of wellness messages have been motivational with the assumption that these people need to be somehow motivated, when in fact, almost everyone who smokes has tried to quit. Almost everyone who's overweight has been through a dozen weight loss programs. So we're really making a false assumption, and it is not very appealing to tell people that they are just unmotivated, because they are motivated, they're just not succeeding.
Fantastic, thanks, Jeff. So we've spoken about the role of leaders in really driving that cultural change. And there's also a lot of research and experience to suggest the importance of a dedicated wellness champions network, so champions at a site or department-based level, and the role they play in providing that peer support and encouragement and motivation. What role do you see those champions playing? Have you seen any good examples of that with workplaces or clients?
I'm encouraged. What I think that's one of the areas that has received a lot of increased focus. You know, it is a little bit like the peer support function. So some companies create a champion's role that's different from their manager roles. And that has a drawback in that those people don't necessarily have any power. And sometimes they are the wellness enthusiasts, but not really have much leadership skills. So I would like at least a mix of the effort to go to middle managers who actually have responsibility to pick up a wellness piece. As I shared, I think 6 different leadership roles in my slide, and I think that they don't have to do all 6, but it would be nice if they took them up. And so I guess I'm concerned that our leadership initiative not be seen as an extra group, an extra add-on, that it be more core to the current business structure.
Yeah, and I think certainly in our experience, we've seen it work well, where they're building the capability, to your point, at the different levels of the organisation, but they're also formalising those roles, say a champion, where it's part of their position description, there's reward and recognition around that, but they're provided with the necessary training, tools and resources, whether it be funding or some ownership and empowerment, to really do wellness at that local or site-based level.
Well, I've seen it work certainly in both ways, where you form a new group of people who are suddenly given the title wellness champions or leaders or whatever, and they've taken off and done well. I would hope that there actually be resources that they would have to implement whatever they're being asked to implement. So I worked with a school system, and they were smart enough to give each of their wellness champions, I don't know what it was, $500 a year as a kind of opportunity to create programming and activities, so that these people weren't just called champions, they actually had some wherewithal to do something, basically.
Yeah, funnily enough, we were sharing before the webinar a school district group that we're working with, and they've done exactly that. So they've developed a local action plan with the back of the training. They've given them some seed funding to get them going and start that momentum.
Great.
Get some early wins on board. We've had another question through, Judd. For what about people who are depressed, anxious, or perhaps are having personal problems or work issue related problems? I find it hard for people to feel enthusiastic and to make change, or due to how they're feeling or experiencing, it can be hard for them to feel enthusiastic or seek help, and they get stuck.
Yeah, well, I would say, by the way, that many groups and cultures are having a big challenge with mental health. I do see it as a cultural problem, not just an individual problem. I mean, with the rates of stress and depression and fatigue, burnout, you can no longer say it's an individual problem. It's actually become a cultural problem. And so what you want to do is create what I'll call a caring community. So a culture where when people are experiencing distress or unhappiness, that they know that their coworkers will come through for them and help them get back on track, give them the time, and that they will feel comfortable seeking professional assistance and not feel that they'll be somehow labeled or felt or misidentified as having always a mental health problem. That's one of the challenges, of course, with mental health is you feel like you'll get a label and it'll stick to you at work. And so you need to create a culture where that issue is not a prominent one. So I do think that cultures can add a lot, particularly with that climate area that I was talking about, that sense of community where people feel as if they belong and care for each other in times of need and look forward to a future together. That's a big factor. Shared vision. There's much fewer mental health problems when people are excited about what they're trying to achieve and they feel like they're on the same page with their coworkers, and they have common values and positive outlook. That in itself, we've talked about positive psychology, but cultures are both positive and negative too, not just individuals, and where people are celebrating each other's strengths and looking at challenges as opportunities and not everything as a problem. You know, there are all sorts of pieces of having an upbeat work environment, even when it's a challenging one. You know, I think all three of those climate factors have a huge role in mental health. In fact, one of my early studies, it was in a war zone, found that climate was the most predictive. Those three factors was most predictive of who was going to have post-traumatic stress disorder and other more common mental illnesses. Really, climate is really a kind of building block towards mental health.
Fantastic. Thank you, Judd. And so I believe that brings us to the end of our questions. So a heartfelt thank you for sharing your wellness wisdom with us today. And I think reminding us too, it's often those small things that we do every day, both an individual and organisational level, that can really contribute to fostering a wellness culture which brings out the best in our people. So. Sure.
You can tell everyone that I'm inviting further contact, that I'm happy to be available if people after this seminar would like to chat with me. We'll figure a time zone that makes sense for everyone and be happy to help because I think our field really benefits when people help each other. That's really such a nice thing about wellness is that we're all in this together and happy to help each other. So thank you so much for putting this on and for making this happen tonight. Thank you.
Fantastic, Judd, and thank you again for being so generous with your time, particularly over the evening, your time. And the best way for people to reach out and contact you, Judd, as well?
I think by my email, which is Judda, Judda, at healthyculture.com. And then once we've connected that way, we can maybe set a phone conversation. I just hesitant, given that we're 12 hours time difference, to do it without the email first. I just don't know if I'll be available when you call.
That's fine. And just a reminder that Judd has also generously provided a copy of the slides from the session together with a white paper which delves further into these topics. So we'll include your contact details.
Yeah, and you know, I've written, as was said in the intro, about 50 books and journal articles on this subject. And obviously I didn't cover everything today, but I would gladly send you a PDF or two if you have a topic. Maybe look on healthyculture.com is just a general frame for things, but I'd be happy to follow up with some written material. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Judd. And I'd certainly encourage you to check out Judd's books as well, which I assume are available or mentioned on your website, Judd, including your new book, 103 Wellness Leadership Challenges. We'll certainly be checking that one out.
That's better on Amazon. Do you guys do Amazon over there?
We'll be checking
Good.
that out as a recommendation.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks. Good night. Good day. Have a great day. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. And just as a formal then wrap up, so as far as upcoming events, and again, the heartfelt thank you to Judd, and we hope you can join us for our next webinar on the 19th of September with Healthy Workplaces, Global Perspectives and Best Practices with Wolf Kirsten, who is the co-founder of the Global Centre for Healthy Workplaces, and also is one of the key people involved with the BUT Consultant Survey as well. So we look forward to his insights there. And as far as some further events coming up for those wanting to further build their capability on how to develop, implement and evaluate a best practice workplace wellness strategy, we do have our accredited training, wellness-wise training coming up. Auckland next week, of which we do have a couple of spots still available. Also Adelaide and Brisbane, for which further information can be found on our wellnesswiseacademy.com.au website. And also, if you know of someone who could benefit from training and accreditation in workplace wellness, we've also teamed up with Snackwise, where if you do refer a colleague to one of our upcoming training programs in 2019, we'll also receive a delicious box of healthy snacks from Healthwise. So to find out more, if you do have someone in mind, again, visit our website. So thank you again to Judd, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in future Wellness Wise webinars. Thanks again.